What's going on, everybody? I'm checking my audio really quick to see what it sounds like online. Hey, that's me. There is something else that I'm doing, and I want to see if I want to make sure that it's doing what I want it to do. Yeah, it's doing a little bit. Hold on. Look, this is me. This is how I have to check things. Let's see. Hopefully, that's not gonna be too distracting. We'll see. I don't think so. It's super low. All right, guys. What is going on? All right. So I wanted to do this today. Hold on, let me drink some booch. So I am live streaming right now. I am live streaming on Facebook. Uh, I'm live streaming on YouTube, and I'm live streaming on Periscope. Periscope's on Twitter for you guys that don't do Twitter. I'm actually gonna turn this one down. Whoa! I'm gonna turn this one down. So I have my Facebook chat up, so I will be able to see if you're watching on Facebook. I will be able to see, and I will be able to respond back to whatever you're going to ask or say or anything like that. Um, but I wanted to come and do this live stream for one reason, and that is just to one try to get more. Well, I said one reason, but multiple reasons. But for a couple reasons. One of those is I just want to I want to get out more content. One, two, I want to try my setup out a little more, and then three, I was reading. So I did a live earlier today, and it was a little bit about just kind of the coronavirus, what's going on, and all of that, and so while I was doing that, I was waiting in the Starbucks line to get my coffee and open up the Bible app while I was waiting, and the verse of the day was from Matthew 18, and it was Matthew chapter 18, verse 4, and so I want to show you that. I want to show you that really quick. So we're gonna go here. So if you see, it says right here in Matthew 18, verse 4, and this is the NET Bible. It says, "Whoever then humbles himself like this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven." And that was the verse for today. So in the NIV, the way it reads is, "Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of the child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven." So I didn't want to. I just wanted to kind of tell you where I was at with that, and um, I want to tell you a little bit about where I was at with that, and because I want to read the whole story to you, because that's what I'm going to do. Because I all I saw was just that verse. Like I haven't really read about it. I read a little bit. I read that one verse, and then it got me to thinking, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to hold off, and I'm going to do like a Bible study on Facebook and YouTube and Twitter, and see how it goes. Like see what happens. Like see what we see what kind of observations we're going to make, about this verse. And so that's what I want to do with you guys. And so what I'm going to do is actually hold on, let me see if I can. I wish there was like just a button I could press and make cuts on OBS. It probably is. I probably just don't know what it is. Um, so I'm gonna be jumping back and forth, and you're gonna see my screen, and you're gonna kind of see what's going on. Um, so take this journey with me. All right. So here we go. So let's read this together. Um, this is Matthew 18. We're going to start with just verse 1. And we're going to go down. I'm actually going to go down just to 9 for right now. So, chapter 18, verse 1. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus, saying, "Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" He called a child, had him stand among them, and said, "I tell you the truth, unless you turn around and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever then humbles himself like this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, and whoever welcomes a child like this in my name welcomes me. But if anyone causes any of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a huge millstone hung around his neck and be drowned in the open sea. Woe to the world because of stumbling blocks. It is necessary that stumbling blocks come, but woe to the person through whom they come. If your hand or your foot causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life crippled or lame than to have 2 hands or 2 feet and be thrown into eternal fire. And if your eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It is better for you to enter into life with 1 eye than to have 2 eyes and be thrown into fiery hell." Wow. Wow. Now, this is Jesus talking. This is Jesus talking to the disciples. So, let's kind of go into study mode here. So I've got my red pencil, and I'm actually using I'm looking up here because my phone's up here where the screen is, but I've actually got my Wacom drawing pad. My wife was actually asking me about it the other day. She was like, "When are you gonna get that thing back out?" And I was like, "I don't know. I'm gonna get it out today." So here we are, and I haven't. Oh, there it is. Okay. So I usually do a lot of this in my head. I usually ask a lot of these questions in my head, and I think about words and stuff like that. But this is how it would be if you were to draw this thing out. This is how it would kind of look in your head. You know, I was hoping that I could just zoom into just this one thing because it's gonna look horrible if I have to. Oh gosh, it's gonna look horrible if I have to draw this small, tiny. All right, we'll do it this way. Okay. So at that time, the disciples. So that's up. These are people here, the disciples. So that's a subject. The disciples came to Jesus. So the disciples were coming to Jesus, and this is really simple stuff, and it's not to make anybody think they're stupid. It's really just kind of logging things in your head, like what's going on in the story. Who are your characters? You have the disciples, and then you have Jesus. And the disciples came up to him. They came up to Jesus, and they asked, "Well, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" And that's kind of I want us to remember this saying here: "Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" Because this is the question. This is the question. And this is the question that this entire thing here, and more than likely, this is going to answer. So I want you to get that context in your head, because what happens a lot of times is we think about just like the one verse. I've actually heard it said a lot of times. I've heard this verse brought up a few times, and it's like verse. What is it? Verse 6. But if anyone causes one of these little ones who believes in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a huge millstone hung around his neck and be thrown into the open sea. And a lot of people use that for stuff like child abuse and all that. Child abuse is horrible, but I don't think that this is what this verse is talking about from the context that we're given here. The context is that the disciples are saying, "Well, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" And Jesus is going to start answering that. So then Jesus called a little kid over to him, and he had them stand among them. Among who? Among the disciples. So you have these disciples, and they're standing around, and then Jesus calls over this little kid, and then has the kid come and stand among them. So it's this picture of this kid is just like you. Like think of this kid as one of you. and then Jesus says, "I tell you the truth, unless you turn around." I thought this was a cool turn of phrase. Um, unless you turn around, because a lot of that word repent that we have in English nowadays, that's what it means. It just means to turn around, like to do a 180. So if we actually go back to the website here, the netbible.org, and we go to that, unless you turn around, it's this Greek word. So we can actually click on the Greek word, and then right down here at the bottom, you have a lot of the information on it. So it has the Strong's number, and Strong's is a concordance for people who aren't Christians. Strong's is a concordance, and what that does is it just takes every word of the Bible and kind of breaks it down. What's like a dictionary almost, but just bigger. It literally has every single word in the Bible in it, and you have these references. So in Strong's, this is the kind of the definition for this Greek word, which I'm going to butcher it, but it looks like it says straphit. I don't know. I'm learning Hebrew, not Greek right now. So let's just say straphit because it's got the long straffetti, maybe straffetti. We'll think maybe. So you have this word, and it's being translated as turn around. And so we look at the definitions here: to turn around, to turn one's self, i.e., to turn back to the one, to turn back to the one. Then we have definition 2a, of one who no longer cares for another. And then a metaphor to turn oneself from one's course of conduct, i.e., to change one's mind. So one thing you could do here is like you've got this sentence here. I tell you the truth unless you turn around. So let's try it with these different definitions here. So I tell you the truth unless you turn around, unless you turn to oneself. So, i.e., to turn the back to one. So if you turn your back on something, all right. And then 2a. So 2a is kind of like this is kind of you have 2, which is to turn oneself or to turn your back to something, and then 2a is saying of one who no longer cares for another. So you're turning your back on something that you don't care about anymore, turning back on someone that you don't care about. And then 2b is metaphorically is to turn oneself from one's course of conduct or to change your mind. So unless you change your mind, unless you change your conduct, or unless you turn your back on someone or something that you care about and become like little children. So that's that. Become like little children. What does that mean? To become like little children. So you have to turn. So it's not a unless you turn your back around and become like little children as like they're the same thing. It's not. I don't think it's the same thing. But it looks here that unless you turn around, unless you turn your back on something that you like, or unless you change the conduct of who you are, and also so if you do these two things, if you turn around and become like little children, and then Jesus says you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. You will never enter the kingdom of heaven. So you have to do those two things. So Jesus, who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And then Jesus puts this kid right there with the disciples, and he says, "Hey, look, you have to do two things." And I don't want this to get confused because it's in my head, so I've got to say it out loud. But I don't want this to be confused. Like these are the only two things that you have to do, or like these are only the only things you ever have to do in your entire Christian life. But these are like this is what he's talking about specifically to who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And Jesus says, unless you turn around, so unless you turn from things that you love, or you change your mindset and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. And so then Jesus kind of explains the little children part. He explains this little children part, and that's what he's going to do for the rest of the verse. You know, the rest of this verse, he's going to focus on the becoming like little children, because I think, you know, just from me reading this, and I'm only reading chapter 18, verses 1 through 9. So just from this little paragraph, he's answering this question, and it looks like the turning around is kind of self-explanatory. So unless you turn around and become like little children, so Jesus is expounding on the little children part. He says, "You, whoever then humbles himself like this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven." Is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. So he answers the question. So whoever humbles himself like this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever welcomes a child like this in my name welcomes me. So this is what struck me. The humbleness. Whoever then humbles himself like this little child. And I actually read it from, I have Bible Gateway pulled up here. I actually read it from the HCSB this morning. I believe it was the HCSB. Therefore, whoever humbles himself like this child, this one is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Okay? That's the HCSB. ESV. Whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest of the kingdom of heaven. And so then I thought, I was thinking, I was kind of like, you know, well, what kind of attributes? Oh shoot, what kind of attributes do little kids kind of possess, and how do you humble? How do you humble yourself? Like how do I humble myself? Or how does one? I think it's better to say how does one of these disciples humble themselves? Because here they are, they're arguing, you know, and or at least in another story in the Gospels, we see that they're arguing about who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And then Jesus says, "Whoever humbles himself like this little child is the greatest. And whoever welcomes a child like this in my name welcomes me." So, like, what are some attributes that little kids have? Sorry for my horrible handwriting. One, this isn't like paper, so it's hard, you know. So, what are some attributes that they have, especially in regards to humbleness? Especially in regards to humbleness. Humbles. There it is. So the word humble, and I wasn't going to go into a whole lot of word study, but you know, it kind of helps to clarify what does that word even mean. So the word humble, to make low, to bring low, to level, to reduce to a plane, um, metaphorically to bring into a humble condition, reduce the meaner circumstances, to assign a lower rank or place, to abase, to be ranked below others who are honored or rewarded, to humble or abase myself by humble living, to lower, depress of one's soul brings one's pride, to have a modest opinion of oneself, to behave in an unassuming manner and devoid all haughtiness. That's so to bring yourself into a lower position. That's what the Greek word here for humbles is. But that made me think, like, how to, because you got to lower yourself like a little child. So what does that mean? What does it mean to humble? What does it mean to lower yourself like a little child? I guess you have to have the attributes of a child, right? You have to share attributes. Man, that is horrible. You have to share attributes. So what kind of attributes do kids have? You know, and I'm not thinking about the bad ones, like they're whiny and stuff like that. But they are dependent, aren't they? They're dependent. Another thing, they're they always question. They always question, or they're just curious. Oh, that is not how you spell curious. Or they're curious. You know, and that's because it's because they lack knowledge, and they know that they don't know, they lack knowledge. But like they understand that they don't have knowledge. So I think that this questioning, this curiosity, you're looking to an authority figure for answers, right? And and this was my thought process, and this is my thought process right now. But like they're dependent, so they look to authority. They look to authority. They lack knowledge, so they look to authority. And there was something else that I thought of today. Um, but it kind of goes with these two. But they're dependent. Um, they're curious. They lack knowledge. They look to authority. You know, and they're trusting, right? Like little kids, like they trust almost anybody. That's why you gotta teach them stranger danger, right? Like I gotta teach a kid stranger danger because they'll trust any old body, man. You know, like you can't just let kids go out and do their own thing, because if you do, then they're going to run away with anybody because they're super trusting. And those are the three these are kind of the three that I thought about earlier today. But then these are also the three that I'm thinking about now. You know, these attributes that these little kids have. So how can we humble ourselves? You know, and it's easy. It's easy. And I think this is one of the reasons why I wanted to dig into it a little bit deeper, because it's easy just to say, "Oh, you got to have faith like a child," And a lot of times we mistake we mis- we mistake faith like a child with we mistake it with like wonder, right? Like you have faith like a child, like you just like look wide eyed at God. You're like, oh, God is so great and all that stuff like that. And that's a part of um, admonition. To admonish God and to admire God. That's a part of it. That. Oop. But I mean, like that's a lot of times this is that ad that admiration. A lot of times this is what we mistake it for, but that's not really what Jesus is talking about here. Jesus isn't talking about just like, hey, like I want you to admire me like a little child. That's not. I don't think that's what Jesus is talking about. And that's a lot of times when you hear this passage discussed or spoke about. That's what we think about. We think about wonder and admonition and admiration. Maybe not admonition, but admiration. You know, we think about admiration and we think about admiring somebody and longingly looking at them and things like that. Um, that's kind of what babies do that. Babies will look at their moms and they'll coo and caw and stuff like that. Um, but I think what Jesus is really talking about here is this stuff right here. Because what's the question he's trying to? And that brings you back. See, that's why it's always good to have the context, because the context brings you back. Who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? So Jesus says you got to humble yourself, bro. You got to humble yourself like this little dude standing among you. He's dependent on his parents. And yeah, he questions. Yeah, he's curious. Because a lot of times that curiosity will be seen as rebellion. It's not necessarily rebellion. It's just they lack knowledge. They don't know. This kid doesn't know. So what is he doing? He's looking to authority to answer his questions. But he trusts the answers that he's given. And he's dependent on the answers that he's given. And he's dependent on sustenance. He's dependent on the one who is there for him. He's dependent on this authority figure. And that's what Jesus says to them. He says, you have to be that. You have to hold on a second, let me erase all this stuff here so I have room for more notes. And that's what I'm doing here. Like, I'm not here teaching people. I'm here reading, and I'm gaining insight myself, because this is like, isn't that pretty profound? When you come and you want to be seen as the greatest, you're like, who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And Jesus says, the one who lacks knowledge and trusts me, the one who's dependent, and the one who it just trusts me, and it's just trustworthiness. And then Jesus says this in verse 6. But so he says all that. He says, look, you got to be like a little child, because anyone who comes like this, in my name, welcomes me. They welcome me. Whoever does this welcomes me. But, however, so you're okay. Now that's the person who's the greatest. So, who is not the greatest? Who is the antithesis of the greatest? And that is anyone who causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin. Now, this is this right here, these little ones. A lot of times, when people talk about this verse, they want to talk about child abusers and stuff like that. And again, child abuse is not good. Because kids are kids. Kids are just like what he's talking about. They're innocent. Innocent is another attribute of kids. They're innocent. They're trustworthy. They don't know anything, and they're just like looking at you, and they're like, God, I believe, I trust in you, and I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm looking for answers, and I'm asking you questions because I trust you, and I depend on you. And I'm just innocent. I don't know. I'm innocent. And so it says, if anyone causes one of these little ones, and I don't think Jesus is talking about kids, man. Because what's the question that Jesus is trying to answer? What is this all going back to? Because this is all part of the same topic, because he says but, so it's connected. But is a connective term, but that connects us over here to what he's talking about. And what is he talking about? He's talking about the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. So these little ones are people who come to Jesus innocent. They don't know anything. They are dependent. They don't have anyone, so they're dependent on nobody, and they're looking for somebody to be dependent on, or to be dependent on, to depend on. They're looking for somebody to depend on. So if anyone, so the antithesis of these little ones, the greatest, the antithesis of the greatest is the one who takes these people who are like little ones, these kids, these new believers, these people who are questioning, these people who are looking for answers. And if you cause that person to sin, it would be better if you had a huge millstone hung around your neck and drowned in the open sea. My God. Now, see, that makes me think, is he still talking to the disciples? And so we go back. So there's a crowd. This is all before all of this conversation, all of this. He's standing in front of a crowd. He heals a demon-possessed boy. And I brought him to your disciples, and they could not heal him. And Jesus answered, "Oh, the faithful and twisted generation." So he's talking to the disciples here. Jesus rebuked the demon, and he's still talking. And he's talking to the disciples. And this is the grain of mustard seed. If you can say to it, move a mountain, and it'll move. And then as they gathered, the disciples and all this crowd, and he said that the Son of Man will be delivered into the hands of men. And when they came into Capernaum, so at that time the disciples came to Jesus. So yeah, he's talking to these guys, and he's saying, "Hey, look, don't cause anyone to stray, because if you cause someone to stray, brother, it'd be better if you had a huge millstone hung around your neck and you were thrown into the sea." These people who come to me and they're looking for answers, these people who come to me and they just want to know, they're looking for answers. They're looking to depend on somebody. They're looking for someone. They're looking for me. And if you cause them to sin, what did Jesus tell the Pharisees? What did he say? See, this is how I could think of Bible verses, but I can't. I can think of what the story is. I remember Jesus tells the Pharisees. He said, "You put burdens on people's shoulders." Here we go. Matthew 23, verse 4. And this is, I actually don't like Bible Hub. I like Bible Hub. I like Bible Hub. I don't like Bible Hub. I don't like Bible Hub for like reading. It's just straight up. I just want to read a verse. So let's go to 23 here. Matthew 23, and then verse 4. So then Jesus said to the crowd, said to the crowds and his disciples, he said, "The scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. So do and observe whatever they tell you, but not the works that they do." So monkey see, monkey do, don't do. Do what they're telling you to do, because what they're telling you to do is right. It says, "For they preach, but they do not practice." And then what does Jesus say here to these Pharisees? He says, "They tie up heavy burdens, hard to bear, and lay them on people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to move them with their fingers." They do all their deeds to be seen by others. For they make their phylacteries broad and their fringes long. That's like the I know what it is. It's hard to pronounce that word, but it's like all like the prayer stuff that they wear. Like they would have these little braided pieces that would hang off their garments and stuff like that. And like the longer they were and the bigger they were, the more holy you were. And so that's what Jesus says that about the Pharisees. He says you Pharisees, you put burdens on people's shoulders and you're not even willing to do it yourself. And so what does that make people do? That makes people feel like they're garbage. It makes them feel like they can't do anything. It makes people turn away from Jesus. And Jesus is telling them, you have to turn away. Unless you turn away, and unless you become like a little child, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. And then he says, whoever humbles himself like this little child who's standing among you is the greatest. Whoever welcomes this child, whoever welcomes a little one, and it says and, so this is a connective. And whoever welcomes a child like this in my name welcomes me. But if you're like the Pharisees and you lay heavy burdens on people's shoulders and you cause people to turn away from me and sin, it would be better if you had a millstone hung around your neck and you were thrown into the open sea. I heard, I think it was from my buddy Ken Mady, and I'll have to talk to him about this, but I'm sure he'll back me up maybe. But there's ancient Jews were like afraid of the sea because they believed that's where like sea monsters and stuff lived, And so Jesus is like appealing to that. He says, "Look, it'd be better if you had a stone around your neck and you were hung out in the open sea with all the sea monsters, with Leviathan. It would be better if you were thrown out there." I had to check my audio because I'm yelling. It would be better for you to be thrown out there with them. And then, whoa, what happened? Oh. And then Jesus says, woe to the world because of stumbling blocks. And then Jesus says it is necessary that stumbling blocks come. But woe to the person through whom they come. Woe. What this is me reading the Bible as I just repeat it a lot. So woe to the world because of stumbling blocks. Woe is me. Woe. Whoa. I should not have done that. That was Matt. Don't ever do that ever again. How do I get this off of here? I wanna highlight. Whoa. Anyways, we went out. Oh, there goes maybe. Whoa. Here we go. Whoa. What is this? Alas. Whoa. I think I was looking too deep into that word, woe. Because I think we all know what woe means. Like, woe to the world. Like, oh man, alas. Mourn, weep with. Woe to the world because of stumbling blocks. because of millstones hung around people's neck that are just so cumbersome for them to overcome, that you cause them to stumble and turn away. It is necessary that stumbling blocks come. Yes, they're going to happen, and it's necessary. Because why? Because we know that those things test people's faith. That's what Romans says, or Hebrews. That's what Hebrews says. It says these trials will come so that to test your faith. And yes, stumbling blocks are going to come, and they're necessary. But woe to the person through whom they come. And then you've heard this one before. If your hand or your foot causes you to sin, and who's he talking to? This whole time, who is he talking to? He's talking to the disciples. The disciples are trying to figure out, well, who's the greatest, Jesus? Who's the greatest? Who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And he says, the one that looks to me for answers, the one that trusts me, the one that comes innocently. You have to turn away from yourself and the things that you love and the habits that you have. You have to come to me with innocence and with just this lack of knowledge and this hunger to know, this hunger to question and get your answers from me and trust me. Jesus, this is Jesus talking about. You have to be like that. That's who's the greatest. But whoa, if you put stumbling blocks on people, if you start thinking you know what you're talking about, like the Pharisees, and you start hanging millstones around people's necks, and you start putting stumbling blocks in other people's way, and you're causing them to sin, it would be better for you to be thrown to the abyss. And then, so that's who Jesus is talking. He says, if your hand, he's not talking about like the people who come to him. He's not talking about these little ones. He's not talking about the newbies. He's talking about if you disciples, if your hand or your foot causes you to sin, cut it off, throw it away. Because it is better for you to enter life crippled or lame than to have 2 hands or 2 feet and be thrown into eternal fire. And if your eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It is better for you to enter into life with 1 eye than have 2 be thrown into fiery hell. That doesn't sound like a conclusion. That doesn't sound like Jesus completely answered that question yet. Because a lot of times what we like to do is we like to stop. Well, we got a new header here. We got a new header, so that means this is a completely different topic. Nope, it's not. Jesus is still answering this question. Jesus is still talking to the disciples. Jesus is still answering this question. So Jesus goes through this whole thing about who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. He talks about being like a child, coming to him in innocence, coming to him with just this need, without all the answers. But if you start acting like you have all the answers and you start to sin, it's better for you to stop, to cut off whatever is causing you to do that and throw it in the fire. And that's after that like he makes that statement about cutting your hand off and your foot off and your eyeball and stuff like that. He makes that statement right after talking about causing other people to sin. So I'm thinking that those 2 things are connected. You're causing other people to sin with your sin. And what's their sin? What's Jesus talking about this whole time? He's telling them to humble themselves. Nikki's calling me. Nikki. He's telling them to humble themselves because they want to know who's the greatest. They want to know who is the greatest, Jesus. So they have pride, man. Pride. Pride is causing them for Jesus to give this warning. Pride is causing them for Jesus to say, hey, look, don't cause anyone else to sin, especially the new people. Because if you cause them to sin, it's better for me to throw you out in the middle of the ocean with all the sea monsters and stuff with a stone around your neck so you sink to the bottom with them. And if you're sinning and causing other people to sin and you're making other people stumble with your sin, cut off your foot, cut off your hand, pluck out your eyeball, because it's better that you get in. It's better that you get eternal life than to be cast into the fire, into the flame with both your hands, both your eyes. And then what does Jesus say? Let's read it. Verse 10. See that you do not disdain one of these little ones. So see, he's still talking. He's still talking here. See that you do not disdain one of these little ones. Don't hate the newbies. Don't hate the newbies. I kind of covered up this word. I think it's I. Oh, 4. Oh, man, I would have got that wrong. Don't hate the little ones. Don't hate the newbies. For I tell you that their angels in heaven always see the face of my Father in heaven. Their angels. What does that mean? It says that they're angels in heaven. What is that talking about? I genuinely don't know. I'm going to look at this. Angelion, right? Angeloi. A messenger, envoy, one who has sent, an angel, a messenger from God. In heaven. Get that off of there. There we go. I think it's pretty straightforward. Let's just take it literally. Angels in heaven. For I tell you that there, this is a possessive there. That there, them, there, it, himself, herself, themself, itself. I mean, that's what he's got to be talking about. He's got to be talking about their possessive angels that are in heaven. They always see the face of my Father in heaven. And then Jesus says, what do you think? So now Jesus is going to pose a question. And he's still answering this question, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? So he tells them all this stuff. And he says, well, what do you think? So he's going to pose this question to you. If someone owns 100 sheep. So he owns 100 sheep. Oh, man. I'm marking out the mark and stuff out here. If he owns 100 sheep, he owns them. So he has 100 sheep. And one of them goes astray. Will he not leave the 99 on the mountains and go look for the one that went astray? But if he finds it, I tell you the truth, he will rejoice more over it than over the 99 that did go astray. In the same way, your Father in heaven is not willing that one of these little ones be lost. In the same way, your Father in heaven is not willing for one of these little ones to be lost. Don't turn your back on these kids, man. Don't turn your back on these newbies. Don't be prideful. Right? Don't be prideful. It's so funny. Like now I'm reading this and it's like Jesus isn't even giving them the chance to be one of the greatest. He's not even giving them the opportunity to do it because the greatest in the kingdom of heaven is the one that comes like a child. And he doesn't give them that option. He says, you can't take the child route. You can't take that child route. He says, and whoever welcomes a child like this, in my name, welcomes me. And then he goes on to define who the little ones are and not to cause them to sin. And he says, don't hate the little ones. Again, he didn't give them the opportunity to become the little ones. He didn't give them the opportunity to be the little ones. He says, don't hate them, little ones. Don't hate them. For I tell you that their angels in heaven always see the face of my Father in heaven. What do you think? If someone owns 100 sheep, one of them goes astray, will he not leave the 99 on the mountain and go look for the one that went astray? So these are things that were astray. Astray. These are things that were owned because he had 100, and then one of them went away. So Jesus says he's going to, whoever the owner, is going to leave 99 of them and go look for the one that went astray. So now we're thinking about that. Now if you think about this, like this person was possessed by God, possessed like they were gods. And then they left, they were led astray, and and he's talking about these little ones. And if he finds it, I tell you the truth, he will rejoice over more and more the 99 that did not go astray. He will rejoice more. And if he finds it, I tell you the truth, he will rejoice more over it than over the 99 that did not go astray. In the same way, your Father in heaven is not willing that one of these little ones be lost. Oh, man. Oh, man. So Jesus is talking about don't disdain the little ones. Don't disdain. Let them come to me. Invite them in, because if you welcome them, you welcome me. Don't disdain them. The thing that ties it together for me, and again, he's still answering this question into verse 15, and I want to keep reading it. It says, in the same way, your Father in heaven is not willing that one of these little ones be lost. So he's talking about if these little ones are lost, like if you cause one of these little ones to sin, if you cause them to go astray, if you sin, and your sin causes them to sin and causes them to go astray, I'm going to go after them before I go after you. Because I'm more willing to go after the one who is led astray than to you, who I know you're going to stay. You're going to stick around. Because you want to be the greatest. But they're the greatest. And you have to serve them. You have to serve them. Who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? They want to know who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, and how can I be that? And Jesus is saying, nope. Not you. But you have to serve them. So you have to put away that pride. So now Jesus talks about this lost sheep, and he talks about going after the lost sheep. Ooh, what are you doing? Oh boy. Oh man. So Jesus talks about the kids, the little ones. Don't lead them astray. And then he talks about if they do go astray, I would be more willing. I would rejoice more for them, and I'm not willing that I lose that. I'm not going to lose them because or despite of you. Don't hate them, but go after them. And then what is? Then let's go on here. So I'm going to scroll down because we is still reading. I want to snip this one. Right? All right, so Jesus just talked about uh, the little ones. The little ones, don't lead them astray. Don't cause them to sin. If you sin, it's better to just cut off the thing that's causing you to sin and be better. Don't hate the new people. Don't hate the little ones. I would rather go after the sheep, the one, than and leave the 99. Like I'm going to go after the one and leave the 99. And then Jesus says, if your brother sins. So I think it's apparent that Jesus is still talking about the little ones. He's still answering this question up here. If your brother sins, go and show him his fault when the two of you are alone. Don't embarrass them. They're new. Don't embarrass them. They're new. If he listens to you, you have regained your brother. You found the one. You've regained your brother. See, a lot of times we read this and man, oh man, we read this and we read it as like, these Christians who've been Christians for a long time. And, and the thing is too, these ones who are like little ones, they don't know any better. They don't know any better. You can't go after them like they're supposed to know what you know. But take them alone, take them up, take them by himself, and say, hey, like you kind of messed up a little bit. And if he listens to you, you have regained your brother. You've gained the 9. You gained the 1 back, and you're 100-fold again. But if he does not listen, take 1 or 2 others with you, so that at the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, every matter may be established. That's a weird way to say it. Let's go to. I like ESV. If he listens to you, you have gained a brother. But if he does not listen to you, take 1 or 2 others along with you, that every charge may be established by evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. Okay, that makes a little bit more sense. So that there's evidence. So that there's more than just you going against them. It's evidence. It's an established matter. You've established it. And if he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. If they don't want to hear it, then you take it in front of the church. And if he refuses to listen to the church, treat him like a Gentile or a tax collector. So after all of that, you've tried really hard to get that newbie. You have served. And this is still like, I still feel like if I'm reading this properly, Jesus hasn't stopped his train of thought here. So who's the greatest? The greatest is the one who's going to serve, who's going to go out of their way. Why? To reconcile. Reconciliation. Don't hate the new person. Don't hate the one who doesn't know as much as you. Don't hate the one who doesn't know, um, who who doesn't know as much as you. Don't hate them. Don't hate the little ones. Don't hate the newbie Christians because they don't know. But take them aside. Do these things. Go out of your way for reconciliation. Leave the 99 that you know are going to be trustworthy, that you can leave them there in the grass, and go after the one. Go after the one that has been led astray, who has sinned. Woe to the one that caused them to sin. Woe to them, and they're gonna. It would be better if they were just cast into the sea. But the Father isn't willing to lose them, so go out of your way for reconciliation. Who's the greatest? This is the greatest. They are. They are worth it. You need to serve them. They're the greatest. And then Jesus says, I tell you the truth, whatever you bind on earth will have been bound in heaven, and whatever you release on earth will have been released in heaven. Now, what's Jesus talking about here? What is Jesus talking about here? Talking about reconciliation, brothers. He's talking about being reconciled. So who are you binding up? What are you binding up? Who is he talking about? He's talking about the newbies, the little ones. The ones whose angels are up in heaven and they see the Father's face day in and day out. And if you bind them here on earth, they're going to be bound in heaven. But if you release them here on earth, they're going to be released in heaven. Again, I tell you the truth, if two of you on earth agree about whatever you ask, my Father in heaven will do it for you. For where two or three are assembled in my name, I am there among them. What was Jesus just talking about? He was talking about gathering two or three witnesses for a testimony, for a trial. That's what he was talking about. Two or three witnesses. Gather two or three witnesses so that you can establish this evidentiary claim against this newbie. And whatever you bind here on earth is bound in heaven. And whatever you release on earth is released in heaven. And then he says, again, I tell you, if two of you on earth agree about whatever you ask, my Father in heaven will do it for you. So if you agree on reconciliation for that one person, my Father in heaven is going to do it for you. Because where two or three of you are gathered, what was he just talking about? And if you're assembled in my name, you're trying to do the good work, you're assembling in my name for reconciliation purposes, I am there among you. And then, oh man. So then Jesus is talking about all of this. And then what does Peter ask? Peter's getting it. Peter's tracking along. He says, oh, okay, Jesus. I think I get it. I'm not the greatest. I'm supposed to serve these little ones. I'm supposed to go out of my way to get them and to reconcile them. But Jesus, how many times do I gotta forgive that guy? How many times do I gotta forgive that brother who sins against me? How many times do I have to forgive them, Jesus? 7 times? Jesus says not 7 times. I tell you, 77 times. That's like a euphemism for like forever. You're never gonna stop, because I'm sure if Peter would have said 77 times, and Jesus would have said 777 times, and he would have just kept on going forever and ever. And then where is Jesus going into? Okay, we're going into there's this final parable. This final parable. And Jesus is talking about reconciliation. He's talking about new believers. He's talking about the people who don't know what the crap is going on. Don't hate them. Don't hate them. Don't lead them astray, but bring them into reconciliation. That's your purpose. They are the greatest. They are the greatest. So I'm going to start with this one here. I'm going to grab this snippet. So for this reason, what's that reason? Reconciliation. The kingdom of heaven is like a king. So the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his slaves. As he began settling his accounts, a man who owed 10,000 talents was brought to him. So this guy owes a lot. Where did he go? He went astray. He was brought to Jesus, or brought to the king, sorry. This is a parable. Because he was not able to repay it, the Lord ordered him to be sold along with his wife, children, and whatever he possessed, and repayment to be made. Then the slave threw himself to the ground before him, saying, "Be patient with me, and I will repay you everything." The Lord had compassion on that slave and released him and forgave him his debt. Here's Jesus say, "Is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven." So the one who humbles himself like a child. And after he went out, that same slave found out one of his fellow slaves who owed him 100 silver coins. After he went out, that same slave found one of his fellow slaves who owed him 100 silver coins. Oh man, here goes the kink in my chain here. The kink in my chain here. That doesn't look anything like what I'm trying to say. Here goes the chink in my chain. So he grabbed him by the throat and he started to choke him, saying, "Pay back what you owe me." And then his fellow slave threw him down and begged him, "Be patient with me, and I will repay you." But he refused. Instead, he went out and threw him in prison until he repaid his debt. So, I mean, I definitely now, like reading it, I don't think this is saying anything different than what I'm saying now. Who's the greatest? It's the lost. Lost who need to be reconciled. That's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. But the thing is once you're the greatest, once you're reconciled, what are you called to do? Serve. You're no longer the greatest. You're called to serve. And this guy, because the disciples, who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Ain't you. Not anymore, because you're reconciled. You have been reconciled. You are like a slave who owed 10,000 talents. You are the worst sinner. You are the worst sinner possible. You owed so big. And I was going to cast you out. I was going to sell you back into slavery and make you work off your debt. But then you begged for forgiveness, and I gave it to you. I released you. Whatever you release on earth is released in heaven. But then that same slave who was released of his debt, he was lost, but now he's found. He was dead, but then he was alive. That same slave went out to another slave who owed him money. So now that person is astray. What are you supposed to do? What should that slave have done? Reconciled. But he didn't. He refused. He became a stumbling block. He called that man a sinner. He led that man astray. He led that man astray. What did Jesus say was better to do? It was better if you're cast out into the abyss. It was better if you're cast out into the open water where the sea monsters live. When his fellow slaves saw what had happened, so when fellow disciples, because Jesus is still talking about this, Jesus is still answering the question, who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Jesus is still answering this question. He says, the one who serves the lost. The lost is the greatest, sorry. The lost is the greatest, and then you become the servant of the greatest, the lost. But then all of the other servants see the slave who was once lost, and now he's found. And he's becoming a stumbling block. His fellow slaves, his fellow disciples, his fellow formerly known as lost, saw what happened. They were very upset and went and told their Lord everything that had taken place. Then his Lord called the first slave and said to him, "Evil slave, I forgave you all of your debt because you begged me." Should you have... and he doesn't say like, you begged me, or you owed me. No, he says, you should have done the same thing. Just like I showed it to you. You should have done the same thing. In anger, his Lord turned him over to the prison guards to torture him until he repaid all that he owed. So also my Father in heaven will do to you if each of you does not forgive your brothers from the heart. Who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Guys, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you enjoyed that. I got a lot out of that. A lot of truth. A lot of truth was in that. I'm gonna save these, and if anybody's interested, I'll keep them. Let's see. What's Matthew 18? This was 23 through 33. This might not, yeah, because it's. Is it the colons? Yeah. Matthew 18, 23, 33. Matthew 18. This was 1 through, I think, 14. And then this one was Matthew 18. This was 15 through 22. Matthew 8 through 15 through 22. I think I could have done the dash there on that one. So yeah, I'll be done in a second. Nikki's home. So guys, Matthew 18. Who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Right here. The greatest in the kingdom of blue. The greatest in the kingdom of heaven, the one that matters more than anything else, is lost. Is lost. So go and reconcile with them and bring them back. Because the Father in heaven is not willing to lose one. He's not willing to lose one. Okay. I won't say that one. All right, guys. I love you. I hope you enjoyed this. I had quite a few people watch with me, and I hope you got something out of it. Um, I hope it shed some light on this portion of Scripture, because for me it has. Um, I mean, a lot of times when we read that verse, the little children, we think of ourselves as the little children. We have to come with childlike faith, and we're going to be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. That's not even the answer to the question. So, guys, seek and save that which is lost. That's His purpose. That's our purpose. Love you guys.